Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2202. The topic is mindset, and the title is How to Get Back on Track. One of my clients recently wrote something in their journal, and I wanted to share that today, then the tips and concepts that I shared with that client. So they wrote the following. Hey Rob, I'm freaking out a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. So, hey Rob, I'm freaking out a bit. I wanted to know your perspective. This year, since starting to work with you, I feel that I finally have developed a lifestyle that I love and am finally seeing results. I know I was likely a pain in the butt at first because I didn't see the subtle changes at first, but I can see them now. Well, that's good. Awesome. Why I'm freaking out is because over Thanksgiving weekend, I controlled my food as much as I could, and I kept my training up, only missing one workout. But I have a family vacation trip coming up in December, the week before Christmas, and then we'll have normal family Christmas stuff happening the week of Christmas and New Year's. I'm afraid of what will happen. I won't be able to eat and train like I should. I am worried about losing progress, but I'm more worried about falling into old habits. I don't want to go back to what I did before, but when I can't do things the right way, I feel that my motivation really suffers, and I start to have anxiety about having to start all over again after the holidays. I love our progress, but it does take work to meal prep, to get up early to train, etc. And I know that when those things fall off, the easiness of not doing those things will be tempting. I'm not sure if you've ever taken an extended time off. I've heard in your podcast that you've never taken more than a week off from training, but even then you were still training clients and still following your diet. But if you do have experience with this or with previous clients, what advice would you have? Sorry for the long entry. So definitely no apologies there. So all my clients have an online journal. It's private between me and them, and they can write whatever they want. So some of my clients, we have over 100 pages in Google Docs of conversations back and forth. So this is exactly the point of getting to work with somebody in a one-on-one style, is you get to write stuff like this and have somebody answer you back. So I do have experience with this feeling in the sense of worrying about kind of defaulting back to old habits that were less than your best, but they were easier. I do understand that. And that's tempting for anyone when they're dealing with a lot of stress. So I've had, I've had some stressful moments since I was 15 years old and started all this. So I do understand the temptingness to kind of just let go of some of these more challenging consistent daily behaviors. I do understand that extremely. And then a lot of clients struggle with this as well. The fear that we would go back to our old selves, which is an interesting perspective in the sense that we're not giving the new self enough credit for control and influence. So how can we have more control and influence with our healthier perspective, with knowing that doing these things that do take work, like meal prep, getting up early to train, or at least scheduling time to train, trying to get to bed on time, just doing all these extra little things that allow us to be our best self, but they're not exactly easy to do. How can we stay more on track with those things, especially when our normal routine is disrupted? So I shared 5 tips that with this client that I thought would be fun to share in today's podcast. Number 1 was to use reminders. I have done this, and it works to some degree. It's not going to be like saving grace and work every time, but I do set reminders. Like I have reminders in my phone. On the home screen of my phone, in the center of the screen, I have an icon for a note feature. So I just use whatever the notes thing is that comes standard on your phones. So I have an Android, so I'm one of those people. I have an Android, not an iPhone. But there's a notes feature that comes in the phone, and I just type in there usually 1, 2, or 3 words. So a short phrase or a single word or something. And it would be a motivational reminder for what I'm going through in the moment. And every time I open my phone, I'm going to see that in the dead center of my phone. Now, we do get in the habit of just kind of opening our phone and scrolling and moving around, so I don't necessarily notice it every time. But I do see it more often than if I weren't to have that reminder. So out of sight, out of mind. So put it in sight and hopefully it'll be in your mind, that kind of thing. So one of the things I have right now is that note today. As of making today's podcast, it says you first. And what that has been is through this year and through the latter part of the year, Meredith and I have been really pushing on a lot of goals. Notably, she's doing some competitions. I've been doing some diets. We've been going through some other projects in life. And what I find is when I work out has been shifted here or there. The strictness of my diet has been shifted, and I'm always hitting my calories and protein, but I like having tuna and rice for breakfast. I know I'm weird, so don't judge me too much on the foods. But tuna and rice for breakfast, and then in the middle of the day, I'll typically have another tuna and rice meal. At the end of the day, I'll have chicken and rice. But, we've been traveling, doing this and that, and chaos of moments. So sometimes you get home, you don't have the right chicken, or you don't have your tuna, or you don't have your rice. I use Instacart a lot, I use Amazon for different things, but you never know. There's little things here or there where slightly you might be off. So instead of eating chicken and rice at night, I'm like, oh crap, we don't have enough chicken. Maybe it's not totally thawed. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll get Meredith her chicken because she's having chicken and apples for dinner, and then I'll just have some, maybe an extra tuna. So I'll end up having a third meal of tuna and rice that day. And it still gets me my goals. But what I find is that starts to become a slippery slope in the sense that, if I normally like to set aside 90 minutes for training, all of a sudden, hey, we had a busy day. I really, I'm not going to have much time. Let me get up early, get what I can in for 40 minutes. And that works great, but maybe that's on Monday. Then Tuesday, we have somebody come to the house. They're doing some projects or something. So another 90-minute workout might be dropped down to 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And then later at the end of the week, we have a couple appointments. We got to drive around and do some things. And I'm like, well, today's going to be kind of crazy. Let me just go downstairs, do some calves, and then I'll try to train tomorrow, to make up for what I might miss today. So that little trade-off, those little things start to add up. So I don't miss the big picture of things. Now, I used to when I was younger, but not anymore. So I get my calories in, I get my protein in, I still get my workouts in, but the quality and the consistency starts to kind of vary a little bit. And I was feeling that starting to happen more and more and more, given the increase of frequency of things that we have going on and traveling and whatnot. So I wrote that note, you first, to remind myself that a lot of the things that I want to have in my future, my 1-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan, all that kind of stuff, it really is decided on what I do today. What I do today influences where I'm at in 1 year, in 5 years, and 10 years. And if I start making these small trade-offs, this quality reduction, that's going to reduce the quality of where I'll be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. So I wanted to remind myself hey man, it's okay. Set your time aside, do a little bit more of the minimums everywhere else. I also communicate that all the time with Meredith and say, hey, I'm kind of feeling like I'm getting on a slippery slope of stuff. Do you mind if I, only do this often, or only do that this often, or I put this off until 6 o'clock tonight rather than doing it right now, so that way I can do this, and this while I'm still fresh and have energy. And she's awesome. She's super supportive. So she'll agree. But those are things that's a reminder example of something I'll use in my life. So for this client, they could put on their phone, just kind of remember, and they're going to choose their own wording. So I'm going to use a lot more words than what they would need to in their reminder. But reminding themselves of how good they feel. Reminding themselves that these extra efforts are worth it because of how extra good they feel. And they can also set maybe a before photo. I'm not a big fan of using negative reminders, but somebody could set a before photo, maybe where they were at 30 pounds ago, and be I don't want to go back to that. Let me put that photo as my wallpaper on my phone. And it's like, oh man, I got to make sure I do the things I do today so I don't end up back there. So I would consider that a negative reminder. But sometimes negative reminders can help, especially if you're in like a negative mindset and you're like, man, life's kicking my butt. I can never get ahead. This is bull crap. If you're already in this like negative mindset, sometimes negative reminders are great because they're very powerful. But if you're trying to cultivate a positive mindset, I would not use a negative reminder. I would use a positive reminder. But that would be one tip, is to use reminders, whether that's on the home screen of your phone, whether that's, a picture on the fridge, something on your laptop. Like I have little notes on my laptop. They were notes that Meredith gave to me, and they're positive and supportive and motivational. So I like that because it motivates me to keep working hard and pushing myself every day. So when I'm getting sleepy and tired, I just look down at one of those notes and be like, okay, dude, you got to wake up. Like, let's go. So those are things that I'll use as well for reminders. Then the second tip I gave was to lower the requirements. And what I mean by this is often people will go through like a holiday season like this client's about to go through, and they're like, oh man, I was missing workouts here and there. I wasn't doing my training right. So when I come back, in January, I'm not missing a single workout. Every single workout is going to be an hour in the gym no matter what. I'm never going to miss my calories again. I'm never going to miss my protein again. I'm only eating the right foods no matter what. That's not going to happen. Absolutely not going to happen. Don't do that to yourself. Perfection isn't possible. You sure as hell want to try to be as controlled as you can be with what's in your control, but you can't control everything. So things are going to need to vary and change a little bit. So understanding that if something comes up this day, and let's say, for example, I was talking about me having to change my training program, like my training times. So rather than doing an hour and a half workout where I make videos for, social media and whatnot, or clients, like I'll sometimes do like a video for a client and say, hey, we were talking about this exercise was hurting. Let me show you this real quick. So I'll do that during my workout time. Is like, let's say I adjusted it to 30 minutes and I was like, okay, what can I do today to have more control next time? Could I trade off some sleep? Could I trade off a house project? Maybe I also cut the grass that day. I could have just waited till the next day. So I look for ways to control things. But ultimately, there isn't everything that's within our control. So if something comes up and I'll look at myself and say, hey, could I have controlled this? If the answer was no, then I'm like, okay, I have to understand that, accept that, and say, okay, well, within that constraint, what can I control? And what's the best next outcome possible? So understanding and having that discussion is important because you want to make sure that you're always controlling what you can control and always seeking out for more control, but then also knowing that you can't control everything. So it's a little bit of like a dichotomy there that you have to find your balance between. But lowering the requirements helps a lot because if you think coming back January 1st, I have to be perfect with my nutrition, I have to be perfect with my training, that's very daunting. Like, oh my God, how am I going to be able to do that? I don't even think I'm going to be able to do that. Why should I even try? Right? Or you start into it and you make a mistake the second day. And you're like, oh, this is ridiculous. This is a waste of time. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do this. I'm just throwing everything out the window. That's typically what happens. If we have this all or nothing approach, it often leads to nothing because we can't do it all the time, right? So eventually we just end up doing nothing. So we want to lower the requirements. We're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for getting back in the groove. So for this client, it's like, okay, if we normally train 4 days a week, after all the holiday craziness, can you come back and at least hit 3 days a week? For meal prepping, let's try to get our calories and protein every day. But if I kind of screw up a little bit, if I don't quite get my protein, that might be the one that I would allow to be variant. But really, I want to try to hit my calories every day. And I haven't even talked about the type of food. So maybe they're normally having tuna and rice and chicken and rice, and now all of a sudden you find out, crap, I don't have any of that. All I have is, fish and potatoes. Then you're going to eat fish and potatoes for whatever calorie and protein you need to get that in. So don't even worry about the what of what you eat. Just get your calories and your protein in. So we want to lower the requirements, but then it's easier for us to get started and to stay started. The third tip is to lower the expectations. And what this means is when you get back to training, you're not going to be hitting PRs. It's very unlikely that you'll come back and hit PRs or even feel good in your workouts. You're often going to feel tight, kind of lethargic, like, oh crap, man, this stuff all hurts again. This doesn't feel very comfortable. I used to be doing 50s and now like 30s are so hard. That's normal. Very, very, very normal. So we want to be able to expect that. Expect that when we come back to consistency, it might not feel as smooth and easy and fun or as strong as we used to. So we do need to expect that slight reduction in performance and increase in difficulty. The fourth tip is that consistency is decided daily, but best viewed in the long term. What this means is what allows us to be consistent is what we do every single day. But when you want to see how consistent you are, it's better to view that in the long term. And what I mean by that is, if I look at this podcast, for example, I have done 2,202 podcasts. Now, I believe the number of available days would probably be somewhere around 10 to 20 above that. So let's say 2,222. So since I started the podcast, I don't actually remember back when that was. I think it was in September of like 2019 or 17 or I don't even know. Kind of forget when I started this thing. But in the entire length of time that I've had in order to do it, I have missed a couple days of podcasts. And my goal was to do it every day because I thought it would be I'm pretty talkative to myself and to a select few people, not really many other people. So I'm an introverted extrovert. I'll talk a lot about things I love to people I love. There you go. So doing a podcast a day to me wasn't hard to do content-wise. I talk to clients all the time. I've worked with people since I was 16 years old. This is all I do all the time, and I absolutely love it. So content like creation was never an issue. It's never been an issue. For 2,202 of these things, I don't really have writer's block. There's always something to talk about. It's very exciting. But it was timing-wise. Can I really be able to find 20 to 30 minutes every single day, like forever, to do a podcast? And what I've found is that I do have to sometimes bulk podcasts. So sometimes I'll make 7 podcasts across 2 days. So that way I don't have to take the microphone with me when I travel and try to do a bunch of podcasts while I'm outside of the house or out of my normal routine. But at least every day has been accounted for. But I believe I've missed probably, 1, 2, or 3% of the total possible days. So I haven't even been perfect. But if I remember one time I was sick and went to the hospital for 3 days over the weekend and didn't have any podcast planned ahead. So I ended up missing I think 4 days of podcasts. And it's like, man, this whole week was a wash. Maybe I missed, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I'm like, man, that was awful. I only got the first 3 days this week. This was horrible. The podcast is going to fail. I've missed my goal of every single day. This is ridiculous. I'm such a failure, right? That would be our typical mindset. It's a horrible response, but that is typically what we do to ourselves. But then, if I span ahead of that and say, well, before this weekend, I made 1,000 of these things and only missed 2 or 3 days. And now since that weekend, I've made another, 1,000 plus and have only missed 2 or 3 days. So consistency is decided daily, meaning we have to do something every day. That's how we develop consistency. But consistency is best viewed in the long term, meaning just because we miss a few things here or there in the narrow scope view, if we take a long-term view, you'll find that those small blips, those small little mistakes really don't mean much the longer you stay trying to be consistent. So missing 2 weeks of training in only 2 weeks, that's pretty significant. Missing 2 weeks of training in 10 years, completely insignificant. So I wanted them to realize that their consistency might waver over this next month. But when they have a whole year of training in, 12 months, is 1 month of, say things being 50% quality, is that really going to hold them back? No. So as long as they're doing as consistent as they can do on a day-to-day basis with whatever is available to them to do it with, in the long run, they will have enough consistency to have great results. And then the fifth and final tip I gave them was to think of everything as practice for the future. So for this client, this is the first holiday season they've gone through while trying to adhere to kind of proper, quote-unquote, healthy nutrition and exercise. So in the past, they weren't even doing it at all. So this year, if they get 50% right, say, hey, congratulate yourself on that 50%. And then on the other 50%, the 50% that we missed, how do we miss less next year? If we view it as a proactive learning experience, on an experience that I can analyze, take something tangible, and apply it to my future, it tends to have a better positive mental and emotional outcome. So think about what you're going through as practice for the future. How can I learn from this to have more consistency and more control if this ever comes up again? So those were 5 tips on how to get back on track, on how to manage this feeling of what happens whenever kind of everything goes out the window and you're fearful of whether you're going to be able to rein it back in. These 5 tips will help. Use reminders, lower the requirements, lower the expectations. Consistency is decided daily, but best viewed long term, and practice for the future. Awesome. If you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. If you share it on social media, that reaches the most amount of people. But even if you just shared a conversation with somebody, that's great as well. I appreciate that you share it, and hopefully they will appreciate it as well. If you like the podcast, you can donate to support the podcast. You can do a straight donation on our website, www.brutalirongym.com, or you can go to nutricost.com and use the code BrutalIron10. There you will be able to buy great supplements. I actually use their supplements every day, and I've been using them for supplements for over 10 years. You can get supplements at a 10% discount, and then whatever you spend, 10% of that comes back to us as a form of commissions, so that would be a good way to donate to the podcast as well if you'd like to. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.